How are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the Virtual Memories Show to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, I'm okay. I went on this monster run yesterday after posting the episode with Scott Edelman, 9.2 miles through some gnarly-ass hills. I still had enough energy to sprint the final hill home, which means I probably could have pushed another few miles and maybe tried to get in a half marathon on the fly. But hey, that gives me a goal for another day, you know? Now, yesterday, I got tagged on LinkedIn, having a professional life. I've got a profile there. It was by somebody at one of the member companies in my trade association. I represent pharmaceutical contract manufacturers, the guys who make drugs for the drug companies, and they do a lot of other services for them. It was one of those tag 5 people shticks. Basically, you honor your coworkers who can't work from home because they have to be on the production line by marking your face the way PPE gear marks theirs, and you post a picture of that with these red lines on your face. So Amy gave me a couple of red marks on my cheeks just below the orbits of my eyes, which is a little tough to balance given the beard and everything else that's going on. And I posted a picture of that. I don't have coworkers. I'm a one-man show, but in all of my correspondences with member companies during the pandemic, as things first flared in the U.S. especially, I've always asked them to just, thank the people who have to be in the facility, who are actually doing the manufacturing of drugs and vaccines for customers, because without them, this all falls apart. And my guys play a pretty big role in the amount of drugs that are actually made and that go to patients ultimately. And it goes into development and clinical trials and all that stuff too. And, we play an important role in healthcare, and it's kind of an invisible one. And, at first I just had the irritation of, oh, God damn it, somebody just tagged me on LinkedIn. But then I realized that this is a minor way of showing support. But I put the picture up on Twitter and Instagram because I'm an egotist. But I also included a link to my local food bank, Center for Food Action, to entice other people to make donations. That's part of the thing with the original post. And I tagged 5 unsuspecting LinkedIn connections. So if any of them follow through, that'll be, viral, I guess. All of that sort of gets me in mind of some of the contradictions and challenges of essential personnel, in air quotes, during the pandemic. I won't get into that here because I sort of talk about it with today's guest, which is not the sort of subject I expected to come up when I was talking with Michael Gerber, editor and publisher of The American Bystander. The Bystander is my favorite magazine, which I mentioned during the conversation. It is a print-only humor magazine. And here's a description from their Patreon. The American Bystander is an all-star print humor magazine in trade paperback book format. Our staff is perhaps the greatest agglomeration in the history of print comedy, including people from The Simpsons, The Onion, Monty Python, National Lampoon, SNL, The New Yorker, Spy, Letterman, and on. The New York Times called us essential reading for comedy nerds, and Newsweek called us the last great humor magazine. And that's all accurate. Every issue is filled with wonderful writing, illustration, and comics from some of the funniest people around, including a ton of guests from the show, like Roz Chast, John Cuneo, who did the cover to the most recent issue, Joe Chardello, Sam Gross, Merrill Marco, Peter Cooper, Josh Allen Friedman, just a bazillion others, too. Shannon Wheeler just jumps to mind. Anyway, a few years ago during an LA visit, I got in a truncated conversation with Michael for the show. Basically, we recorded for a bit at his local library, got kicked out of the room, then found another room to record a bit more. He's a really thoughtful guy about both serious and humorous topics, so I was glad to reconnect with him here. Now, this one, I will admit, is a little longer than some of the daily episodes, but for Christ's sakes, you're in quarantine or self-isolation all day. What the hell else are you going to listen to? So give yourself 45 minutes for this one. As caveats go, just, he was using the internal mic for his computer, so audio quality isn't as great as my usual in-persons. But after 29 of these in 30 days, I'm sure you're accustomed to varying audio. Here's me and Michael. I was going to be in LA and then San Diego in June for a biotech show in San Diego, and I was going to do LA for a couple of days. So I thought, it would have been a good opportunity. But now, of course, nobody's going anywhere. Right. So we're doomed.
Well, were you going to try to get to Comic-Con too?
No. Oh, okay. No, I last came to Comic-Con in 2005, and that was just when it became about 100-something thousand people.
Yeah.
For me, not so necessary. I found.
That's right. That's me too. That's me too.
Yeah, especially for the stuff that I do. That's not the milieu. I need to be sitting at a table with somebody, not or sitting in their hotel or something like that, as opposed to like in the middle of 100,000 people holding a mic up to them. So.
Yes, no, that's right. I get that. I get that. I also too, what you do, and this is one of the reasons I like it so much, is it's so literary. I went a couple of times, and I like the celebratory aspects of Comic-Con, but just in general, it's not my tribe.
Yeah. It's nice. The guys who are incidentally there, but that's like a handful of people. You'll get Eddie Campbell and guys like that, but generally, it's going to be superheroes and superhero movies.
Yeah. My wife works in television, and it's really more what she loves. She loves that stuff, and I had a period where I loved it, but it doesn't speak to me now.
We may as well start off with that then. Instead of the how are you coping, what are you binging on? Are you watching anything?
Oh, God, it's interesting. I've somehow figured out a way to work harder for free during the quarantine. So it really, for me, it's always a question of just like working as hard as I can and keeping it together, physically and mentally while I'm doing that, because Bystander takes so much out of me. And then we're doing this Substack newsletter called Quarantine Cavalcade, which was just basically, as soon as the quarantine came down here in LA, I thought, I know my contributors are going to be going bonkers, and I know that my readers are going to be going bonkers. So let's see if let's see if we can solve two problems at once. And I'm really pleased that it's been very popular, and people are responding to it exactly that way, saying, thanks, it's keeping me sane. The only difficulty is that it's, I'm putting up 2 pieces a day, and it's just a lot of work.
I'm doing this daily as one of those, like, I get it, but it's also if I stop for me, there's a question, if I stop doing it, does something bad happen? Do I start to fall into more of an inertia thing, or of course bring down a curse on my whole family? But just that sense of, if I don't do this, I might spiral into something worse. So,
there's something to be said for that. I'm the world's worst guitarist. I've been picked up playing that for a while. Trying to do a little reading, trying to do a little watching of television. But nothing specifically. Like I'm not somebody who really drops into like Game of Thrones or something like that. I'm trying to think of the last thing that I have very weird taste. So like, for example, I loved Sex Education on Netflix.
Oh, I've heard that's great, but I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. And then I loved Berlin Babylon.
We did the first episode of that, liked it, but it's one of those things we need to focus on. Yes. We can't sit there with an iPad out while watching it.
Yes, that's exactly right. And also, because Weimar is one of my history interests. So I was fascinated to see how they would, like, for example, I turned to Kate and say, oh, that's Anita Berber, or, oh, that's, so-and-so Magnus Hirschfeld, or whatever these names are. But, it was funny because I think it's the 3rd season that's up now. It's about a manipulation in the German stock market to try to, it's just basically to make a bunch of money, but drive the country into ruin. And Kate and I both said, we turned to each other, this is a little too close to home. Like a lot of it's a little too close to home. So I haven't been watching that. I've been wondering if I should start watching I, Claudius again. That's something I go to periodically.
John Hodgman was doing a podcast, iPodius, all about I, Claudius.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've never watched it. I never watched the
Oh, I
movie,
Claudius
the
is marvelous.
miniseries. I've heard
Yeah,
it's great, and he started doing this as I think it may have been pre-quarantine,
yeah.
but yeah, he's doing with I forget who his partner is, but they're doing it might even be it might not just be episode by episode. It might be that they're like subdividing even further to
Oh,
stretch this
interesting.
out. So
Well, the thing is, Roman history is that's one of the careers I might have had if I didn't do what I do now. And so, yeah, Claudius is really interesting. And I was just talking to Sherry Flanagan, and I was
drop names, why don't you?
well, no, I was just talking to Sherry. I mean, Sherry and I talk a lot, and
She is one of my big regrets about the pandemic is that I was supposed to hook up with her
oh
in the
yeah,
fall at one of the cons or festivals
yes,
because I would kill to sit down with Sherry and record
oh,
because she
you
has the
guys would
collection
love
coming
it.
from New York Review Books.
Yes,
But now
yes,
it's great. We might maybe they'll connect us by this format, but
yes,
it's not the same thing. That first time you want to sit down across from someone and
yeah.
talk, not be a remote voice. But
That I'm
anyway.
sure that will happen, and it will be just as lovely as you think it is. Sherry's
Mm.
great, but I was telling her, my friends, my friends know that I have two books that I am always threatening to write. One is a memoir because
Mm.
I've had kind of an interesting life, and then two is a novel set in ancient Rome. And so and I'm constantly reading for the novel set in ancient Rome. So I was talking to Sherry, and she said, I had never heard this. What's the story? And so I pitched her, and she's like, you must write this book.
Yeah.
The difficulty is, and this brings me back to Claudius. What I really like about Claudius, and what I really like about the Robert Graves books before then, and before I forget, remind me to tell you my John Hodgman story.
Will do.
Um,
I'm writing notes while we talk. So yeah.
yeah, okay. Uh, so the great thing about Graves' book, and then to a lesser degree, but still in the BBC, is that it really gives you a sense of Rome as a place populated by people, and not
Mhm.
sort of demi Shakespearean types. Because the thing that's wonderful about Rome is modern life is very, very recognizable in ancient Rome.
Mhm.
And uh, what I would say is the major political um, fissure that led to the empire, led to the end of the republic and the beginning of the empire, was very similar, like strikingly similar to our current Democrat and Republican way
I'll
of
tell
thinking
you,
of the world.
even now, I blew off the Romans for decades
Uh-huh.
because I went to St. John's College in Annapolis. It's
Oh,
very
I'm so
Athens centric.
envious. I'm so envious of that.
Well, I only went for grad school, so I only did 2 years there instead of the full 4 years that the
Okay.
undergrads do with a really extensive education there.
Yeah. Right.
But I did my Homer, Plato, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, and it was decades later when I went back, maybe 2012, for a weekend to oh God, what was the book we were doing? The year after that was Moby Dick. I forget what it was the first year, but anyway, we get together for this thing called the Piraeus,
Mm-hmm.
and I mentioned to one of my favorite tutors, I never really took on the Romans, never read Virgil because I
Mm-hmm.
figured the
Mm-hmm.
Aeneid was sort of the
Mm-hmm.
the Kobe Bryant to Michael Jordan
Yes,
of
that's
Homer.
actually a very good way to put it. Actually,
I
I
felt
would
really
agree
good
there.
about that one.
I
Yeah,
know that's really good.
And he's like, no, you really do need to read the Romans because, without them, you don't understand what Greek life turned into
Uh
and
huh.
the permutation.
Uh
And so he
huh.
turns me on to Livy and
Uh
a
huh.
bunch of the other
Uh huh.
Romans. And I had oh yeah, no, I was supposed to be reading this. Okay, now I understand how American history mirrors everything
Yes.
we saw back
Yes.
in
Yes.
ancient Rome, that there's not a whole lot that escapes the templates and models they had already set up in terms
Yeah.
of corruption, human behavior, governance, and everything. Yeah.
The highs and the lows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Suetonius, The Lives of the 12 Caesars, is really the central and the kind of seed text of I Claudius. And the first time you read it, it's fascinating. You're just like, because it really is, to my knowledge, it's the first work of history that really emphasizes the personality of the people. And it's been years since I read it, but I seem to remember that there was a part in Caesar, in the capsule biography of Caesar, where they talk about as his slaves, people were afraid to touch his body after he was murdered. Otherwise, they might be murdered themselves. They didn't know who killed him, and they thought this was how bad it was in Rome at that time. If you took care of his body, would you be branded a traitor and slaughtered by the same people who just stabbed Caesar? So his slaves actually go out from his villa, his home, and to the theater of Pompey, get the body. And Suetonius talks about as they took it back to the home to be prepared, it was on a litter, and at one point Caesar's dead hand falls out of the litter, and the crowd that's watching it gasps, because it's clearly like, this guy is really dead. It's really interesting. I have become quite an aficionado of Caesar, in the same way that Kubrick loves Napoleon. I see that. I'm like, yeah, there's something about Caesar. I'm actually interested in ancient Rome from an earlier time, the time of the Gracchi brothers, who the 12-year-old me, I read and I was like, that's John and Robert Kennedy. And from that moment, I was like, I got to read everything I can about this time. So I got in that way, but then recently, over the last 5 years, I've been reading a ton about Caesar, and he's just a fascinating person. So, but I have to tell you my John Hodgman story.
Yeah.
So my John Hodgman story is, John and I both went to Yale. I was class of 91. He was class of 94. He and I knew each other. We're not close friends, but we're friends. And he was funny and I was funny, and it wasn't like, the world was so big. So I was there for an extra. I'd lived in New York for a year or two, and then came up to New Haven to live for a year because I was dating somebody who was still going to school there. And that relationship ended just as well as you think it might have.
Naturally.
Yeah, right. But to pay my bills while I was there, I worked in a video store, and John Hodgman and I worked in the video store together. And so it was entertaining. We entertained each other. But what I remember the most about it was that we had a manager who, to torment us, he would come in at 8:30 every morning before the store opened at 9, and he would put in Groundhog Day. So every day I would walk in and Groundhog Day would be playing. Yeah, it was funny. But it's been really lovely to see John kind of blossom over these last 20 years, because of course, you know a lot of people who are talented people, and for whatever reason the stars don't align. I knew John first as a book agent, when he's in New York. So it's been really great to see him, as I say, blossom into who he's become. It's nice.
And if you can, find a way to angle him onto the podcast, that would be great. Not that I'm nudging, but
I don't talk as much as I'd like, but
we have another mutual friend who is also, apparently pushed and just gotten dead silent. So I understand. I'm some schlub from New Jersey.
What? No, Gil, too. If John is still the guy I knew, that's probably just more busyness than anything else.
That's what I figure. I goof on this stuff, but again, everybody's got a lot going on in their days and lives. And in his case, rewatching I, Claudius. So.
Yeah. It's amazing because there's so many, Patrick Stewart is in that. The BBC, John Hurt is an amazing Caligula. It's just really kind of weedy. And,
well, he's also an actor. I find it very difficult to find a bad role John Hurt was in. It's I would watch it. The standard. I'd watch him reading the phone book, basically. But
with that voice, you would. It's an amazing voice.
Down to Winston Smith at the end. But anyway, the question I had though, and just to mirror my own issues with figuring out how to do the podcast in this era, did you have doubt or questions about the bystander as we were heading into this, as to the viability, the question of why? Okay.
No, absolutely not, because Bystander's publishing model is.
I figure you're privileged in that respect because you don't rely on newsstands and
on purpose. I mean, Bystander's publishing model is meant to survive everything but a nuclear strike to my apartment. It could probably survive a nuclear strike to my apartment at this point because somebody else would just pick it up.
No offense, but I would do it in a heartbeat. Not that I'm funny, but I would just, even if we weren't sure you were dead, I would still pick it up, and he would have wanted it this way.
He would have wanted it this way. With my health the way it is, which is it's getting better. I'm getting stronger and stronger.
Good.
But it does make you think. It's like, okay, what is the succession plan? And so I've reached out to some staffers and been like, listen, if anything, if I ever get hit by a bus, here's where it is. Here's how to do it. It's all set up, And with 5 years, what's interesting about Bystander editorially now is it is sort of settling into what it is. And now, first the fight is to get it to a place of stability that people like, and people like it. It's like, that's great too. People like it. But then, me being me, once we get to this point, I'm sort of like, okay, how do we make it better? How do we change it to make it better? So no, I wasn't concerned about it's. I want to, Gil. I always, when we ever talk, I talk a lot because you ask questions that have a lot of that I want to answer as seriously as I can, and so I wasn't sure. It pretty much from the moment Trump has been elected, this has been a very difficult time to run a humor magazine. And that's a little bit surprising to people. But this is not Nixon. This is not Reagan. This is not Hoover. This is somebody who really dominates the news cycle and thrives on making people afraid. And so when people are a bit afraid, a bit concerned, a bit worried, comedy is a relief. When they're really concerned, when they're really worried, it's not, your brain, that part of your brain shuts down. You're going into like serious protective mode. And so with Trump, that's been difficult. So with the coronavirus, I had been watching it since about November, because I'm interested in China, and I'm also interested in pandemics. And some of that comes from ancient Roman times, but also having studied the Black Death in college, having studied the 1918 flu, so I was kind of paying attention to that, and also too, I'm run the endowment for Yale's Humor Magazine at this point. I'm trying to get someone else to do that, but so I was trying to pay attention to that too, like financially, what might it do? So when it happened, I was not as surprised maybe as other people were. I think I actually had COVID in end of February, early March. I live in Santa Monica, so that's not impossible. But in any case, Bystander has amazingly only gotten stronger. The emails I get from people now about the magazine, usually it's, hey, this is great. Thank you. I like this magazine. It's really good. I'm going to tell my friends. And that's a nice email to get.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting an email which is like, thank God for continuing to publish. Issue 14 is hitting doorsteps this week.
I got mine last week.
Good.
I have it right here in front of me.
Good.
Yeah.
You'll like it. I think it's really, you'll see, it's really kind of rounding into something. But people now say, it's really nice to know that this thing is trucking along no matter what. And my partners, I talked to Brian McConaughey and Alan Goldberg, my partners last week, and they said, are we going to be, so you're going to keep doing this? Are we going to be talking about issue number 20 or 25 or whatever? I said, yeah. I said, I'm 50 now. I'm going to be 51 in June. And most of my life, I've thought to myself, I'm doing whatever I'm doing right now, but then I'm also thinking about what I'm going to do next. And you heard me kind of say it earlier, like I'm going to do this Roman book, or I'm going to do this memoir.
Yeah.
I said to Brian, Brian and Alan, I kind of come to the conclusion that maybe this is what I'm in capital G, capital T, capital D going to do. Like this is the thing I'm going to do. Um, it's a weird feeling, but you get to a certain age and you're like, okay, like this is a substantial project worth 5 years and counting, close to 8 years and counting of my life.
It came up a week or so ago with a photojournalist I was recording with, who Kyle Cassidy. He's lives in Philadelphia. He's been photographing healthcare workers, essential personnel,
Oh,
people like that.
amazing. Wow.
And his take was, "This is the one thing I'm good at,
Uh-huh.
and I've got to use it right
Uh-huh.
now because this is it."
Yeah.
So, yeah, that sense of
Yeah.
not just that this is your calling, but that this is also a moment where your calling benefits people. It's got to
I,
feel pretty good.
well, it's interesting. I look at the gentleman you just talked about and I thought, yeah, that's right. That is something really beneficial. I don't really think of myself in that way. I try to do my best with what I have aptitude to do. And then other people can say, oh, this is meaningful to me. And that makes me feel really good. But you're maybe you're the same way. You're talking to somebody who thinks every day, oh, maybe I should have been a biologist. Oh,
Oh
maybe I
yeah,
should have been a
yeah.
historian. These other things. I picked comedy writing. I was talking to Sherry, and I said, Sherry, did you know that I considered joining the CIA? And she said, no. And I said, yeah. I said, I was a history major at Yale. Basically, it's like, it's basically just walking down the hall to be an analyst at the CIA. And she's like, oh, I'm glad you weren't. And I said, yeah. I said, when I graduated from college, I thought to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to make sure that what I do doesn't make the world a worse place.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, the covert world, or whatever you want to say about it, I think
The
there's a
secret
lot of,
show. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of patriots in it. I think that people are generally patriotic and are doing it for a good reason. But I think that the moral ambiguity of it, I looked at that and thought, no, I couldn't. They would ask me to do something that I was not okay with doing, and I know myself well enough to know that I would just walk.
Well, there's
And
also
so,
if you, it was from the film, but I think it reflects reality. Breach, the
hmm,
movie about, God, the mole, the CIA mole, whose name I'm blanking on.
Aldrich
Um,
Ames, not that guy.
no, he was FBI, I think.
Okay.
Chris Cooper plays him in the film, and
Oh yeah,
Laura Linney is
yeah, right. Who is
the
that?
analyst. I'm typing it up now quietly so it doesn't reverberate on the mic over here. But let me see. It was Robert Hansen. That was
Yeah, right,
the guy.
right.
So there's this moment where Laura Linney basically tells Ryan Phillippe's character that her entire career has been devoted to trying to figure out who this mole is, and it's been her boss, and he's been basically stymieing her this entire time. So her whole work life was a lie. Like everything
Mm-hmm.
she thought she was doing turned out to be for naught,
Mm-hmm.
and was deliberately. So there's that sense also of you could
Yes,
devote your life to this sort of stuff and discover
yeah,
that, wow, that was complete bullshit, even though you were
yes,
well intentioned and trying
yes.
to do good.
Absolutely right.
Um,
Absolutely right. And
and that's yeah,
the
yeah.
cherry on the cherry on top for me was that my writing partner uh, from Yale, a man named Jonathan Schwartz, who now writes for The Intercept. He and I wrote comedy in our 20s, and then he went on to write politics. His uncle was station chief in Quito, Venezuela in the 60s. And I knew about that station because that's one of the stations that's mentioned in a lot of the JFK assassination stuff that talks about the
Mm-hmm.
CIA. And so it was a particularly bloody station. It was particularly, there was a lot of, repressive mayhem that came out of that place. And so as I read about that, I thought, I didn't want anything to do with that. A million miles away from that, I I couldn't live with myself. And then also too, he had been kicked out, or I don't know what the details were, but it was clear, like at a certain point they said, we're done with you, and then
Yeah,
they just cut the guy loose. And I thought to myself, that's also not okay. In
right.
that this
Being
is
disposable. Yeah,
yeah. If you're going into it like for the same attitude that you'd go into, say, the Foreign Service, which was another thing I thought of. you know, like, so it was interesting. I remember saying it to Sherry, and I remember thinking, boy, you're a different person than you were when you were 22. But
Yeah. Well, that I pray to God we all are. You know?
but it's funny because, it's it also is very um, it also is very consonant, where a lot of the things
Mhm.
that I write about, and hi Claudius, for example, things that I'm interested in, do kind of circle these few topics.
Do you feel your background in history helps or hurts you right now? Does it make you
Well,
oversensitive to the world that we're in that wheels within
um,
wheels sort of way?
in the infinite
I'm
wheel.
asking for a friend.
Well, I'll tell you that uh, I'm sure I mentioned this the last time we spoke, but uh, about, I don't know, 8 years ago now, I nearly died, and the chronic illness that I'd had for many years intensified, so that I almost died. And what saved my life was a very rare, intense kind of acupuncture. I was talking to someone else, and I still get this, and I also do Qigong on top of it every day. After I talk to you, I'm going to do my set every day.
Yeah.
And I was talking, this is a long way of answering your question. I was talking to a friend of mine who's also gotten this kind of acupuncture. And I said to her, I said, I feel like I've given something up in the, like I was offered a trade. Essentially, you can still be alive, but there's certain things that you can't engage in the way that you could engage before. And one of them was conspiracies and all that sort of hidden history stuff that I used to love. Another is horror movies. I used to love horror movies. Can't really watch them anymore. Um, and so this is a long way of answering your question. I I try as much as I can to stay in the moment and in what's going on today, um, and what's our current situation, because it's very easy for me to draw upon um, knowledge that I had about the 1918 flu. Well, in January, when I heard somebody say it's going to be like 1918, like a CDC person, I was like, holy fucking shit! Like, okay,
Do people know what this means? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I get
exactly.
you.
Like, do people know what this means? Do people know the kind of dislocation that's going to happen in our society? So, on the one hand, there's a kind of neurotic or paranoid or nervous, worried way of looking at all this stuff. But the other way of looking at it, which I think is really useful, I was talking to somebody recently who's an older person. Most of my friends are older, and I was saying, you know, this is a deeply human experience, like going through a pandemic, not knowing if you're going to make it, not knowing if the next person whose hand you shake is going to give you a disease. This is this is how human beings have lived since we dropped from the trees in the savannah. And this 100 years, where basically anything you got, or most things you got, could be cleared up in a shot. Well, I love that. I think that's wonderful, and I
Sure.
and you can see it in the art. You can see people assuming a long life and health and all the rest. The art is different, and then it's this sort of 1918 to 2018. People think about and talk about different things. So I look at this and I go, maybe we're going back to that earlier mode of being. Maybe we're not. We'll see how it goes. The other thing is that I was listening. I'm a great fan of Dan Savage, and he was talking about this very issue. And he was saying, whenever I get too freaked out, I'm paraphrasing him, whenever I get too freaked out, I look at my dining room table, because my dining room table, my grandparents had that dining room table, my aunts had the dining room table, and they all survived the 1918 flu with this table. And some of them were actually laid out on this table because there weren't any hospital beds for them.
Hmm.
So you look at it and you go, okay, this is very scary. It's particularly scary because we have basically a feudal mentality as a president. Um, but at the same time, it does connect us. We're not lost in time. We're connected with the people that came before. We're connected with the people after. And our job really is just to get through with as much courage and compassion as we can. And I think individually and as groups we can do that. I just do wish that there was more leadership, because I think that makes it psychologically much, much more difficult. Well, I mean, what are you hearing from people? You're going around asking folks, what's the general sense?
Well, most of them don't have that degree of historical background that you do. There is that, and I'm just saying they aren't, students of history, but
Hmm.
there's that sense of um, either absorbing yourself in the minutia, and that happened early on with this series. There were a couple of older guests in their 70s and 80s,
Hmm.
and everything I asked them turned into like what their protocol was for bringing the groceries in the house and
Yeah,
stuff
right,
like that. I'm like,
right,
I thought you were going to talk more meta, but okay, that's if this is what you want to talk about that's going to get you through,
right,
into the
right,
next day, then I'm here for you.
right.
Um, but yeah, that sense of uncertainty, the sense of, we're all on our own, which is
Uh-huh.
not how America was supposed to be,
Yeah,
as opposed to, certain states like ours, New Jersey, New York, and California, where you have
mhm.
these very active governors who,
Yes, right,
you know, are
right,
trying to coordinate as best they can.
right.
Um, but yeah, it's in my day job, I'm, dealing with people on the Hill and
Yeah,
hearing, China, China, China. I'm like, that's cool. But on the flip side, we have a lot of problems we're trying to deal with here. And
uh,
basically telling, meat processing people that they're disposable
right,
because,
right, right,
your
right,
interests represent Iowa's farmers.
right,
That's not cool. And
right.
once we get through all this, I have a feeling there's going to
Yeah,
be some sort of reckoning. But
yes, yes.
yeah.
Gil, I'm so glad you say that because uh,
And I don't
honestly,
usually talk this boldly
yeah,
about
I
my
get it.
feelings on the show, but I figure you and I can,
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. I
yeah.
appreciate that. I appreciate you doing it. Uh, when people ask me about this, I'm kind of queerly optimistic. You know, uh, 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 they're medievalists. I follow medieval Twitter, and I'm sure the medievalists would get mad at me. But uh, the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, is commonly considered to have started in 1350, and that's exactly when the Black Death ended.
Hmm.
And so, or if you look at the end of the 1918 flu, what was the 20s like? Not just in America, in Germany and everywhere.
Yeah.
So, my feeling is if we can get through this, and we will, in one way or another, we will get through it. I think what's going to happen is people are going to turn towards here. They're going to turn towards the human. Um, there's going to be, I really do think this. I think there's going to be that the thing that troubles me the most about American society is this cultivated core of turning towards a certain kind of religion or a certain kind of sentimentality, which like is when you watch the NFL on Fox,
Yeah.
is it
The
really
the
is it about
robots
yeah,
and
is it
yeah.
about religion? Well, no, not really. But there's an element of worship in it. There's an element of patriotism. There's an element of militarism. It's all kind of mixed together. So that kind of stuff's always worried me, um, and because it's gotten worse in my life. I was born in '69, which into a fairly secular world, into a fairly secular America, in Missouri even. But then by the time I was a teenager, Missouri was really starting and running into more and more of these people who were not only talking about the rapture, they were rooting for it.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hoping will happen is that our culture will decisively, the American culture will decisively turn towards um, art and science and humanism, taking care of people, um, and really start solving the problems that we've willfully not, that at least some portion of our country has not wanted to solve since 1980. There's a
Yeah.
kind
No,
of break on purpose.
I'm going more with the if things break right, this turns into labor's moment to flip the fuck
No,
out and yeah.
well, that's exactly what I'm saying.
But I'm
I,
sure there needs to be a not spiritual but humanistic aspect to that
no,
too. I'm with you. Yeah.
this is the thing. That's you and I are saying the same thing because
Yeah.
essentially, when you have a group of people, when you have somebody who looks around and goes, you know what, it's nice to think about God, it's nice to talk about God, it's nice to go to church, it's nice to be with people and all the rest, but really, all we know for sure is that we are here. And so, okay, well, how do we make this as pleasant and fair and interesting and loving and compassionate as possible, that idea naturally flows towards all the political stuff you're talking about. And so the interesting question is, a lot of my friends are Bernie people. I'm not a Bernie person because I didn't feel that he could put together the coalition that he would need to do all the things that he wanted to do, almost all of which I agreed with. So I think he's a transitional figure. He's an important transitional figure towards what's going to come next. And when I see somebody like AOC, I go, oh, well, she's a freaking brilliant politician and young and smart as hell. And so the question is, we just have to get to this point. I think that things are going to shift. And I think they're going to shift in really interesting ways. So in general, I'm pretty optimistic, but I'm pretty optimistic for a guy who doesn't want to leave his house.
Which reminds me, I have a book I need to send you, so I'm going to get your address after this. A guest I did last year, a guy named Martin Hageland, a Yale professor, actually. A book called This Life, Secular Faith and Spiritual Freedom. It's this weird re-understanding of Marxism and atheism and some other, basically uses Martin Luther King as this kind of central figure for rethinking capitalism and beyond. Yeah. And it's a book that I have reservations about, but I have continued to ponder for the last year plus. So I take that as that means there's something good. So,
okay, cool. Well, I have to say, the thing that saved my life and the world that I live in now is not a materialist world. It's, like when it was not, the process that I have been undergoing cannot really be explained by materialism or even Western science, but it does happen and it does work. And so then what do you do with that? So, but what's interesting about it is that at least in my experience, the more that I've turned towards my heart and away from my head, or, use my head for what it's good for, use my heart for what it's good for, the more, kind of brass tacks that I get in the way that I look at politics. Or, a friend of mine, a bystander, said, he's a libertarian. He said, at some point I'm going to, set you right about your politics. And I said, listen, I have no problem having that conversation given two things. If we grant that, one, old people got to be taken care of. Two, everybody's got to have a place to live and enough to eat. And three, you got to educate kids. As long as that's off the table, well, then let's arrange it however you want. But a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, and a lot of what's the reason that coronavirus is hitting the United States so hard is that we have an economic system that denies the reality of the body. And I can tell you from personal experience, I was sick for 20 years, couldn't work very well, went from Yale high flyer, going to do great things, to literally second semester of my senior year started getting sick. By the time I was 30, I was basically out of the workforce. I did the best I could, wrote books, and some of them did well and some of them didn't. But that was a really interesting experience because it was like, wait,
this is how tentative how tenuous everything is. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Everything's tenuous. And the thing is that, capitalism doesn't care if you need a place to live. And I go, well, that's not going to work over the long haul because, I read an article on Slate yesterday about that, about how the professional class is starting to realize how the system works for people who don't have any money. And I go, okay, that's where I was reading something about Lenin once, and they talked about this, and they said revolutions don't happen when the lower classes are getting it in the neck. It's when the middle and upper middle classes started getting it in the neck. That's when the revolution happens.
But that gets right back to your Roman history. It's when they start taking the girls that they want and start, insulting the quote unquote, the artisans, or at least the middle class. Well, then all of a sudden it's hey, maybe this guy isn't the God King. Exactly. And we need to change,
Well, right. I mean, it's even more basic than that, because the brothers that I looked at, when I read about them in Plutarch and thought, oh, these are the Kennedy brothers. They were two brothers, the Gracchi, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. And they were tribunes, so they were the people that were responsible for introducing new laws into Rome. And because that was a dangerous thing to do, they were inviolate. You could not harm them. They introduced, basically, they wanted to extend citizenship and they wanted to expand land, and they wanted to have land reform. And land back then was wealth. So basically, you're having redistribution of wealth and cutting people in on the deal, because if you were a Roman citizen, you had a lot more rights. So it's basically the same thing. When Trump comes in, he says, we're shutting down the borders, and it's exactly the reverse of that. So the end of the story is, unfortunately, that both of them were killed, and both of them were killed by hired mobs. The right wing got so angry at their privilege being taken away that they hired mobs, and they said, "These people are tyrants. Go get them." And the mobs who were being paid, killed first the older brother and then the younger brother. But the problem is that most Roman historians, most classicists over the centuries have been, Oxford and Cambridge dons, right? So we take the rich guy, the rich side, the optimate side in these conversations, we take them at their word. Cicero says Caesar is a tyrant. Well, we believe Cicero. Well, there's no reason we should be believing Cicero any more than we should be believing Caesar. So, I'm a little far afield, but I guess I want to say that if the American ruling class thinks that it's going to buy its way out of this situation with $1,200 and sending everybody back to work to die, packing plant people or people who work in nail salons or whatever, I just have to say, one, that's incredibly un-American, unpatriotic, and not taking care of your fellow citizens. But also, two, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. It's never worked in history before. It's all of these tough guys look completely, unbeatable until you see them being walked into the public square. So I think
I'm with you.
It's an amazing time, and I'm just trying to keep it together.
I just want to see what comes next.
Yeah, right. I like that you run. I get your updates on social that you're doing your runs, and I'm thinking, good, Gil, keep your body strong because we need you for the other side.
That's it. We'll talk soon, Michael, and someday we'll be traveling again. I will come out to LA, come out to Santa Monica, and we'll
please, or when the next time we have a bystander event because you're in Jersey, right?
Yeah, I can get into New York, provided it's not the hot zone.
Next time we have a bystander event, I'll let you know, and you can come and meet everybody. It's great. It's great, and it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. It's really something that I think is going to last for 100 years, and I'm really proud of that.
It's my favorite magazine. Thanks so much for making it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of all that's left nowadays, I get New Yorker, New York. That I added Vanity Fair recently just to piss off Trump, but that's
How is Vanity Fair with the new editor? I haven't read it. Did you like it?
Same here. I just started last month, so I just figured it's $9, but at least I show up as a demographic. How circulation works. So I was like, I may as well just show them a little love. But
good.
Yeah, no, I was at their offices the morning after Graydon Carter's going away party.
What?
Because I was recording with Cullen Murphy, and he was hungover. Everybody was apparently destroyed. I'd met. Did I ever tell you the Graydon Carter? So I'll tell you off mic. I bumped into Graydon Carter, which is what led to this whole experience. But anyway, I'm going to let you go right now, and we're going to upload the episode and get it up tomorrow morning. But
great.
Stay healthy, as healthy as you can get. And
right. No, I'm just about to take a 15-pound stone ball and do calisthenics with it for 45 minutes. I'm doing great.
Once you're in the habit, that's how it works.
Yeah, right. Well, I can't run like you, buddy, but maybe someday.
I'm hip, and I'm just glad, I'm able to do it at 49 years old. So
that's great. What are you doing for 50, Gil?
I was supposed to do a marathon by the time I turned 50, but the chances of them hosting any marathons this year are pretty goddamn slim. So I'm just going to stay in the best shape I can stay in and not injure myself.
Good.
That's all I'm headed for. So
good.
But we'll talk soon, Michael. Thanks for coming on.
Gil. Oh, my pleasure.
That was Michael Gerber. Go check out The American Bystander at patreon.com/bystander, BYSTANDER, so you can learn more about how to subscribe and support the last great humor magazine around. And accent on the great as opposed to last. Also humor. You can subscribe also to their Quarantine Cavalcade email, which comes out twice a day at theamericanbystander.substack.com. And there'll be links to all this stuff in the episode and show notes for this one. Their website is americanbystander.org. You can buy past issues there and subscribe through that Patreon link. You can follow the Bystander on Twitter at Bystander Tweets, all one word, and Michael at mgerber937. The Bystander is also on Instagram as The American Bystander. It really is a great magazine, and I feel like it's important to support this sort of work, you know? Now, we'll be back tomorrow with another COVID check-in. But seriously, I have no idea how long I'm going to keep up with the dailies. Now that I've done this for more than a month, I'm trying to figure out the next steps for the podcast. So you're coming along for the ride, I guess. Still, if you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners about how you're dealing throughout the pandemic, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18, GROTH18 at gmail.com. You can find the contact info at our websites, vmspod.com and chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can find a link to the COVID-19 sessions at both sites with all of these daily episodes. You can also just subscribe to the Virtual Memory Show via iTunes, Spotify, or other podcatchers to make sure you get every episode and go through all of our archives of 370 in-person shows too. In the before time, I did always record in person, but now I'm using Zencastr.com to record remotely. If you're interested in using it, it is spelled Zencastr, so no final E. The pro level is $20 a month, but my Patreon supporters more than cover that, especially since I'm not spending money on parking and tolls, subway trips, and in-show coffee and all that stuff for those in-person episodes. Plus, the amount of time I was spending just driving and all that, I realize maybe there is something to do in these remotes, so we'll see how I balance that stuff out when we get to the next normal. So if you can spare anything, don't give it to me. Give it to the artists and writers you like. Go subscribe to the American Bystander. Go to the Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever, for the artists and writers you like. If it's a cartoonist, ask if you can buy their art or some illustrations. Show them some support. And give to charities. Your local food bank, as I mentioned at the top of this one, Center for Food Action is mine. Just give. If you can help people and they're in need, help them. I am Gil Roth. It is April 30th, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going. Stay safe and wash your damn hands.